It's so good to see everyone here tonight. Glad to see these young people, and when I say young people, I'm including everybody from Brother Bishop all the way down. I think Santa Claus is probably about the oldest one that's here. We're just real so glad that you're here. We continue our study in the divided kingdom. We are focusing our attention upon the prophet Elisha. We have seen his kind and tender and benevolent deeds in working with these people. Do I have this on? Is this on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if you have not a king chart, raise your hand. Thomas will see that you get one. I believe everybody is just about got theirs. Tonight we turn to 2 Kings chapter 6, and we begin here with verse 8. As we know, the nation of Syria has always been an enemy of the Israelites, whether Judah or northern Israel, either one. And in verse 8 we read that Syria warred against Israel. But he had a problem. It seemed like he would make out a plan. He would set up an ambush or something like that. But it wouldn't materialize like he wanted it to, because the prophet Elisha would tell the king of Israel all about it. And he would say, now don't go to that place. They're laying in wait for you. And this happened not only once, this happened twice, this happened a number of times. To finally the king of Syria, he said in verse 11, will you not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? Somebody is betraying us. Somebody is telling the king of Israel our secrets, our plans. And when we go to carry them out, we can't, because he's already aware of them. And he either escapes or something of that nature. And they said, it's not any of us, O king, that's betraying you in any fashion. There's a prophet over there in northern Israel that tells the king everything that you even think of in your bedchamber. Well, now that was startling to the king. Up until this time, we've seen so many benevolent deeds of Elisha. And just here, we're going to run into a series of episodes where he is concerned with kings. And not only kings, but even kings of a foreign nation, a hostile nation. And the kings of this hostile nation, though they did not like Elisha, they hated Elisha. Elisha was a thorn in their flesh. Because of what Elisha could do and did do, they had to respect him and respect his power, which showed that they, through Elisha, had to respect the power of the God of Elisha. And that was what Elisha was really interested in most of all, after all, that the God of Israel would be respected. And so he said, well, let's go down. Where is he? He's in Dothan, verse 13. Let's go get him. So they compassed the city, verse 14. And the servant of the man of God, and we've learned that his name is Gehazi, and the man of God was Elisha. He saw all of these horses and chariots, and he said in verse 15, alas, my master, how shall we do? The servant just looked out. He saw such a great host. He didn't see how they're going to escape. What are we going to do? Well, Elisha assured him in verse 16, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. You know, folks, we have many people who are very militantly and aggressively antagonistic to the cause of Christ. But you know, majority never does determine what is right. I heard a tape of a man preaching this week, and he said there's only been 2 times in the history of mankind when good men were in the majority. One was in the Garden of Eden before they fell. The other was immediately after the flood, Noah and his family. All the other times, those that serve God have always been in the minority. But I'm still persuaded that there are more of us than it is of them, simply because God and I together make a majority. We don't count noses to determine what is right and what is wrong doing. Now, a lot of people do. Whatever most folks are doing, whatever the majority is doing, whatever's the most popular, that's the way a lot of folks decide how they're going to live their life. That's sort of pitiful, because the majority never has been right with God, except those 2 instances I was talking about. And so Elisha said, look out there over the mountains. And he did, and it was full of horses and chariots of fire round about. Now that was a miraculous provision of forces, no doubt. But Elisha prayed unto the Lord. And as for these that had come to capture him, he said, I pray, Lord, smite them with blindness. Now this was not total, complete, eye shut blindness. The word translated blindness here, and some translations have it, dimness of vision, to where they could not perceive, they could not see clearly everything round about them. They wouldn't understand even what they saw. So he said, as for these Syrians, you give them dimness of vision. And so he goes out to them. He said, I know who you're looking for, and I know where he is. Just follow me. I'll take you to the right place. I'll take you to the right man. Now, he wasn't lying to him. He was the man, and certainly he was taken along with him. And he led those people, and they followed him right into the city of Samaria, which was the capital of northern Israel. Well, these soldiers went in there. They woke up, as far as their sight was concerned. They were right there surrounded by the enemy forces. Don't you know they were surprised? Where's that fella that said he's going to lead us in where we want to go? We're in a bad situation here. For the king of northern Israel asked Elisha, said, shall I kill them all, wipe them out? Elisha said, no, you don't do that. You wouldn't even do that with captives that you had taken. I'll tell you what you do with them. You feed them and send them back home. He fed them. They must have been humiliated. They went back home. And as a result of all of that, at the end of verse 23, there was a period of time when Syria did not invade northern Israel. The way and manner in which Elisha does his work, he is most effective. Now I want you to think about what has happened here. Little wonder that the king of Syria and other nations would have respect for Elisha. Look how effective he was. He accomplished what needed to be accomplished. They all would know there was a prophet there in northern Israel. And that's what Elisha wanted to accomplish. Well, after that, we read about Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria. He came up and besieged Samaria. They had peace for a while, but the peace between the Syrians and the Israelites, it never did last very long. And as a result of this city being besieged, there was a great famine. And it told about the things here in verse 25 that they were eating. It's terrible. And even as despicable as it was of a high price. These people were on the verge of starving to death. And the king was out among them one day, and a lady cried out unto him, "Help me, my lord, O king." And he said in verse 27, "If the Lord do not help thee, whence shall I help thee?" Out of the barn floor, out of the wine press, there's nothing there. How in the world can I help thee? He said, "What ails you, lady?" And she told a horrible tale. And what she told him shows the extent of the distress in which the people of Samaria were under because of the king Ben-Hadad of Syria. She said, "There was another woman and I, we each had a child. And we decided today we will eat my child. And tomorrow we'll eat yours." Well, we ate mine, but the next day she hid hers. Isn't that a horrible situation in which to find people? And that's the situation in which the people of Samaria found themselves. And this so upset the king, it came to pass when he heard this, verse 30, he rent his clothes. He passed by on the wall, and the people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth within upon his flesh. He was greatly distressed for his people. But I want you to notice who it was he blamed for all of their problems. He said, "God do so to, and more also to me, if the head of Elisha the son of Shaphat shall stand on him this day." Now, how he figured Elisha was the blame, I don't know. He's sort of taken a page out of the biography of Ahab here, isn't it? Ahab tried to accuse Elijah of being the cause of the problems of Israel. But Elijah wasn't the cause of the problems, and Elisha is not the cause of the problems here. And Elisha was there in his house, and they came to take him, and he said, when the messenger comes, well, you shut the door, you hold him fast at the door, his master not far behind him. Elisha was certainly being threatened by the king of northern Israel. But now in chapter 7, we learn a powerful lesson. I want us to just sort of read just about every verse of this chapter. Then Elisha said, "Hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, tomorrow about this time shall be a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria." In other words, there's going to be plenty of food and it's going to be cheap. How in the world could that prophet make such a statement as that, seeing the conditions that existed? They were deplorable, they were horrible, they were intolerable, and he comes forward with this kind of prophecy. Well, then the Lord, on whose hand the king leaned, answered the man of God and said, "Behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be?" And this is how Elisha answered him, "Behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not eat thereof." Because he didn't believe what the prophet said. It's going to come, but you won't get any of it. Well, our scene shifts to 4 men who were in dire circumstances. They had leprosy. They began to reason among themselves. He said, "Why sit we here until we die?" They had 3 alternatives as far as they reasoned. We can sit here and die. Well, they were by the gate of the city. They could do that. They had leprosy. We can go in the city. We'd starve to death with all of them. We'll die. Or we can surrender to the Syrians. They may kill us. If they do, we'll die. But on the other hand, they might take care of us. Now, if you had those three alternatives, it wouldn't be hard for you to decide what to do, would it? 1, you're going to die. 2, you're going to die. 3, you might die. But 3, you might be taken care of. Well, they decided they'd go to the Syrian camp. Meanwhile, the Lord had caused the Syrian camp to hear what sounded like armies coming their direction. And they decided that the people of Israel had hired the kings of the Hittites, verse 6, and the kings of Egypt to come and relieve them of this siege that they were under. Now, this was the doing of the Lord. The Lord caused them, there wasn't any armies coming from those places. They just mistakenly thought that was going to take place. But thinking as they were, they fled. They got out of there. They left their tents, they left their gold, they left their silver, they left their horses, they left their food, they left everything that they had, and they just broke camp and fled. Well, when the leprous men got there, wasn't anybody there. But all of that bounty was still round about. Don't you know they were excited? Here, there's plenty. And they went from one tent to another, just filling themselves up and getting all the clothes and the gold and everything. And they were just, they were living it up. They were high, every one of them, high on the hog right here, sure enough. Look at the abundance that we have. And one of them said, you know, what we're doing is not so good. We got people back over in Samaria, and the king over there, they need to know about this. There's plenty here for everybody. They need to go. We're just living it up for ourselves. We're just thinking about of ourselves. He said, this is a day of glad tidings. When you hear the word glad tidings, what single word do you think of? Gospel. That's what the gospel is, glad tidings. This is a day of glad tidings, and we hold our peace. Why, that was unthinkable for them. And that's unthinkable for us too, folks. We have glad tidings. It's just unthinkable that we won't tell those who need it all about it. So they go back to Samaria. They tell the people over there all about it. The king hears it, and he's suspicious. He doesn't believe a word of it. He thinks that the Syrians, knowing that they're in such deep distress, they're planning on us coming out to their camp. They're lying in ambush. They're going to fall upon us. We are not going to fall for that. But they decided, well, let's at least investigate. So they sent out some horsemen to investigate. Were these leprous men telling the truth? Well, they went out and came back and said, yes, sirree. They are telling it just exactly like it is. And the people rushed out of that city. Can't you imagine that they would? It's just exactly like Elisha said it was going to be. And I want you to notice right at the end of this chapter, this man that said, oh, if the Lord opens up the windows of heaven. Elisha said, it's not going to be that way. And Elisha said, you'll see it. You won't get any of it. And right at the end of the chapter, verse 20, so it fell out unto him, for the people trode upon him in the gate, and he died. He got trampled to death by the mob that was going out to the Syrian camp. Isn't it strange how people who don't want to believe think they're going to some way or another get around what God has said? People do that today, don't they? People live in the most wicked kind of ways, and they think some way or another the results of my abominable behavior I'll get around it. It won't happen to me. Well, if it doesn't happen in this life, there's a day of judgment awaiting. All accounts are not settled in this life, are they? There's a day of judgment when there will be righteous judgment, no mistakes. And those that have thought they have gotten around God, they're going to meet him face to face. And it's going to be dreadful for them. Now that should motivate me and for you never to try to get around what God has taught. Just simply accept what God has said. I was listening on this same tape here the other day. This fellow was talking about instrumental music. He said, why don't we have sense enough just to accept what God has said instead of trying to make it better? Now, people think they can make it better when they get their guitars and their organs and their pianos and their hip drums and all that sort of stuff. That doesn't make anything better. That's despicable. I use that word a lot because I can pronounce it. And why can't we just accept what God has said and be content with his word? Well, this man learned it, didn't he? Now, in chapter 8, Elisha spoke to this woman, this Shunammite woman, whose son he had raised from the dead. He told her there was going to be a 7-year famine, and she would do well to get out of the land, to go down into the Philistine land, stay there 7 years, and then you can return. Well, in verse 4, we find Gehazi in the presence of the king of northern Israel. And he is talking to him, and he's telling him about all the great things that Elisha had done. And in verse 5, he told him how he had raised this woman's son from the dead. And as he was talking, in walks the woman with her son. And he said, why, here's the woman. This is the woman right here. And this is her son. And she was in distress somewhat. She came with a request, it's implied here, for the king. She had been gone 7 years. And during that 7 years, it seems like that there had been others that had sort of taken over her properties. Now you keep in mind that she was called a great woman. And there are many reasons that she was great, spiritually great as well, but probably a person of rather well-to-do materially. But her absence of 7 years obviously had provoked some would just take over her property for themselves. And she said, I want my property back. I've come back, it belongs to me, and I want it back. And so the king appointed unto her, verse 6, a certain officer, and he said, restore all that was hers, all the fruits of the field since the day that she left the land, even until now. You know, this king, we read about him. He's a wicked man. All the kings of northern Israel were. But you know, even he had one brilliant streak of goodness and justice, didn't he? He was compassionate toward this individual that had been driven out of the land for a number of years. Well, here's an instance where Elisha deals with kings. He came to Damascus. Now, Damascus is the capital of Syria. It's rather strange that the prophet of God would go up to Syria, but as I said before, even the foreigners had respect for Elisha. And at this particular time, Ben-Hadad, the king, he was sick. So he says, go inquire of him. And when they told him he was in the area, go inquire of him whether I'm going to get well. So he sent a man named Hazael to inquire. Now, this is not the first time we read about Hazael. Going back again to the time that Elisha was so discouraged and God put him back in business to anoint Jehu and to select Elisha, he also said, appoint and anoint Hazael. He will eventually be king of Syria. So Hazael comes. He brought a present in his hand, and he wanted to know, will the king recover? Well, the answer is, it's rather strange. He said, yeah, you're going to recover, but you're going to die. You know, well, wait a minute, make up your mind which way it's going to be. You're going to recover from the disease, but your death is imminent. It's right on you. It's going to happen. And so at this point, it says in verse 11 that the man of God wept. Why did he weep there in the presence of Hazael? Hazael asked him, verse 12, and here's his answer. Because I know the evil that thou wilt do unto the children of Israel, their strongholds wilt thou set on fire, their young men wilt thou slay with a sword, and will dash their children and rip up their women with child. Hazael was indignant to hear this. He said, am I a dog? Well, he proves he's worse than a dog. He goes back to Ben-Hadad. Ben-Hadad said, what did he tell you? He said, you'll recover from your disease. He didn't tell him he was going to die. But Hazael made sure that he did. Hazael got a big blanket. He soaked it in water. He went into the king. He put it over his head, and he smothered him to death. Yes, Hazael's a pretty bad dog, don't you think? He is just the kind of person, and as we read the relationship between Israel and Syria, and while Hazael is king, he was always doing evil toward the people of Israel. Elisha had it nailed just exactly what would happen. Now at verse 16, I'd put a J over that verse because you're going to shift from northern Israel to southern Judah. And Joram or Jehoram, and by the way, the name Joram or Jehoram, that refers to the same name, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, and Jehoshaphat was the king when he took over, and his son Jehoram becomes king. So what you've got at the end of verse 16, two Jehorams on the throne. Jehoram in southern Judah, Jehoram in northern Israel. Now I told you at the start of this study, you can get this awfully complicated if you're not careful. And one of the reasons is that you can get these names that sound so much alike, and here we even have kings of the same name at the same time. If you don't know that which one you're talking about, why, it'd be very easy to become confused about it. But now, what about this Joram or Jehoram in southern Judah now? This is southern Judah, the lineage of David. Verse 18 says, he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as did the house of Ahab. Why in the world would a king in southern Judah walk like the kings of northern Israel that were wicked? Here's why. His wife was the child of Ahab. Now, if you look on your king chart, I want you to get this relationship because this is going to be significant. You see the two Jehorams down there opposite one another? Jehoram on both sides. Under the Jehoram of northern Israel, there's a line. He's the last one of that family to rule in northern Israel. But now, after him, there's going to be another king named Jehu. And we'll read about Jehu in chapters 9 and 10. We won't get there tonight, but we'll get there eventually, Lord willing. And the son of Jehoram in southern Judah was named Ahaziah. Now, over here under northern Israel, look at it. You see Omri up there, and then Ahab, and then Ahaziah, one of his sons, and he died, and Jehoram, another of his sons, and Ahab also had a daughter, and the daughter's name was Athaliah. If you look over here under the southern Judah kings, under Ahaziah, you see Athaliah. Now, as I mentioned once before, I think that's not a he. That's the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. And what is she doing listed over here as the rulers of southern Judah? Well, just stay tuned, we'll find out. Because after Jehoram, Ahaziah becomes king. Now, Ahaziah is the son of Jehoram. And he's the son of Athaliah. But now, when we get over here in the next chapters, and we start reading about Jehu, you'll see how these kings end their reign and how it is that Athaliah takes over. Now, according to plans, and our time is expired for tonight, you're to have a prayer meeting next Wednesday night, and then your gospel meeting the next Wednesday night. Is that correct? And then we're going to read about Jehu becoming king. Let me encourage you to do something that you will enjoy. Read chapters 9 and 10 about Jehu. He's one of the most active, aggressive, bloody individuals that you read about in all the pages of the Bible. You're talking about wiping folks out. Jehu is a master. And he was a pretty fast chariot driver too. You'll read about that. Okay, anybody have any comment or question about situations now as they exist at this point? If not, look forward to Jehu 3 weeks hence.